Spooks. Alex's face broke into a broad grin. Come on, Sarah. You're not going to tell me you actually believe in ghosts. His attitude made her feel uncomfortable.
No, of course not. She could see by his expression he didn't believe her. Whether he meant to or not, he was making her feel stupid. I'm just saying what people say. A lot of strange things happen there.
Yeah. He drawled, almost unable to suppress laughing.
Are they the same people who claim they've been for a ride in a flying saucer? Alex waved his hands dramatically in the air. With little green. His total dismissal was making her angry. Maybe she did have a few unusual thoughts, but she had the right to think what she wanted. She snapped back, interrupting him. It's a waste of time talking to you, Alex Metcalf. Sarah always used his full name when she was annoyed with him. The young girl turned and went to walk away, but Alex grabbed her gently by the shoulder, pulling her back around. He was trying to sound serious. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make fun of you, but it's just superstition. Honestly, I really do think it's a terrific idea to hold the Halloween party at the old Dr. Laver house. She just stared at him sulkily. Everybody's going, and once you've thought about it, you will too. Sarah shook her head. How could he insult her and then think his pathetic excuse for an apology was enough? She knew how she felt, and she felt it was wrong. Sarah pulled her shoulder away and spun around in a huff, her long blonde tresses flying out, then falling across her face. She was too annoyed to answer him. She walked away, striding down the lane, leaving Alex beside the old oak, hardly able to hide the grin that had begun to spread across his face.
I'll see you there then, he called confidently after her.
It was the most stupid thing she had ever heard, going up there in the dark. She refused to accept that she believed in ghosts or spirits or fairies, or whatever. Though, no, that wasn't why she thought it was a bad idea. Ignore all the stories. They were just stories, probably. She didn't want to go because it could be dangerous. That was the real reason. The place was falling apart. It was derelict, and had been since before she moved into the district. Thinking about it, it was strange why it had never been sold or developed, especially as the land had amazing views and everything. But nobody had lived there in how long? 20. Some said 30. Or more. All those years it had been empty. It was a shame, really. Anyway, everybody had their own opinion, but it was definitely long before she or most of her friends had been born. She was passing the low, rough stone wall surrounding St. Andrews, and she glanced up. Over the ruins of the old Priory farm buildings, nestled some way back behind the churchyard. There, up on the hill, she could just see the creepy building, standing on its own, about 1.5 kilometers away from the cluster of houses that made up the tiny village of Smithsfield. Why were all the spooky houses always on top of a hill? She wondered, as suddenly a great clanging noise assaulted her ears. Sarah almost jumped out of her skin, before she realized it was just the church bells, almost directly above her now. It was Tuesday. Every Tuesday, the bell ringers would be practicing in the belfry, just below the castellated tower top. A very unusual structure. Mr. Tomlinson, her teacher, had told her once. It's the only one in the district that was built with a fortified tower. She smiled at herself, at her nerves, and quickened her walk into the village. She looked at the ancient thatched cottages nestled around the village green and the glass-like duck pond. No, there was nothing in the least spooky. It was far too pretty a village to be anything like that. The bus lurched from side to side as Sarah gazed through the finger-smeared window, sightlessly into the dark. The old bus was the only way through to Cliffborough. It seemed to have as many creaks and rattles as it was years old, as it bumped and swung its way around the narrow lanes. She glanced up towards the front, past the bobbing heads of her fellow passengers. The headlights barely cut into the darkness, giving the impression of a tunnel, hemmed in by the high hedges that almost reached over the bus. There was a chuckle at her side. "What about where he slashed her with the scissors then?" said Steve. "Some hairdresser." What about?" The boy poked her with his finger. "Are you listening, Sarah?" She pulled herself away and shrugged. "Sarah." He sounded hurt. "I thought you said you liked the movie." She turned to him. "I'm just tired, that's all." "Tired why?" "No reason." She almost snapped. "I'm just tired, all right." She resumed her empty gaze, but this time her mind wasn't drifting. This time her mind was preoccupied with what lay down the end of the road. She wouldn't admit it, least of all to Steve, but even wanted to go home. And not because she was tired. She just didn't want to. There was a loud pinging noise as Steve stabbed his finger onto the stop button. A pale blue sign ominously declared beside the driver. A man looked up, as he'd done probably a million times, and glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing Steve rising from his seat. He raised his head questioningly. "Dr. Labor Lane," answered Steve to the unasked question. They negotiated another bend and coasted until, with squealing brakes, the bus shuddered to a stop. Steve was standing, leaning back over the side of the seat. She made no attempt to move. "Come on, Sarah. We're here." He was moving to the doorway with sideways steps, watching and waiting for her. "I'm a bit tired. I think I'll give it a miss." He looked anxiously, half embarrassed at the waiting 11 or so other passengers. "Don't let me down now. I've been looking forward to tonight all week." She tried to smile. She could feel multiple eyes looking at her. "You go, Steve. I'll see you tomorrow." The driver revved the accelerator in impatience. "I'll be the only one there on my own." He pleaded pitifully. "I can't go alone." "Are you going?" called the driver impatiently. "There's other folks on here who would like to get home." He revved the engine again. Wordlessly, Sarah stood up. Steve smiled and edged his way to the open front door, not taking his eyes off her in case she held back. "Steve, I really don't think this is a good idea." He reached out and took her hand reassuringly. "Come on," he said encouragingly. "We haven't got any costumes." She tried one last delay, but it was no use, and too late. He was already stepping out onto the gravel roadway. She held back and stared after him. Behind her, the driver let out a deep sigh, his voice irritable. "Are you getting off, or are you going to sit back down?" Steve gave her a gentle but firm tug, and suddenly she was stood on the side of the road. There was a hiss as air forced into the ram, and the door quickly shut behind her. She half turned and looked pleadingly at the driver, but he had turned away and was staring forward down the road. The tires crunched on the loose stones, and the bus swept away from them. She stared after it, listening to the noise of the engine as it faded, and the bus disappeared around the corner. As its faint roar decreased, another noise took its place. Somewhere unseen was the sound of overly loud music. They walked towards it, turning through a gap in the high hedge onto a small, overgrown driveway. 100 meters further along, cars and motorbikes, half on, half off, partly blocked the driveway. Past these was a timber gate. It hung off its hinges wide open. Beyond, standing alone on top of the small hill, was Dr. Labor Manor, close up in the dark, and looked even more foreboding. Sarah knew it was only a feeling generated by her present mood. She knew the place well, of course, from the outside, having passed by many, many times. It was sad, really. Once it would have been a great house, the center of anything that happened in the district, but those days were long gone now. 2 stories high of red brick, with small attic windows along the length of the gray slate roof. At ground level, there were wide sash windows, and a small portico jutted out over the front entrance. Once upon a time, it would have attracted the cream of society to its social gatherings, and probably had done for centuries. As it was rumored, it had been built on the foundations of an old castle. A priory had replaced that, and that had been torn down during the reign of Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries. As they approached the front of the building, Sarah could see that most of the window glass had been broken. She assumed rocks thrown by local hooligans and drunks over the years. There were two of these on the ground floor shone. Flickering light above the house was in darkness, except for one of the attic windows. There a pale green glow shone, and there was a shape vaguely human, as if someone was watching them. The hairs on the back of Sarah's neck began to stand on end. Steve followed her frightened stare. For an instant, she felt his grip tighten. Then he eased. "Shit," he muttered. "You've really got to give it to Alex. When he sets up a spook night, he really sets up a spook night." He pulled forwards enthusiastically, but Sarah couldn't take her eyes off the shape. She was sure that she saw it move. At least she thought she was sure. All the same, it only made her more convinced that they shouldn't be here. She was consciously suppressing the feeling that they were disturbing something as they stepped up into the entrance. The music grew louder as they climbed the worn stone steps towards the gaping hole in the brickwork. Patterns danced over the walls inside, and suddenly, one moved up out of the half-shadow. A swirling black shape seemed to leap up out at them. There was a scream, Sarah realizing it was her as the blackness enveloped them. Sarah's eyes opened wide in fright. Instinctively she stepped back, and she would have fallen down the steps, if not for the grip on her wrist from Steve's hand. She cowered in terror. Through the veil of shock, she faintly heard laughter. She couldn't speak, and a tear had begun its run over her cheek. A voice sought to comfort her. "Sarah, Sarah, it's all right." It was Steve. He was grinning. Why was he smiling? She couldn't understand why he wasn't scared. "Steve," she sobbed, clutching him. "It's all right. It's Jason. It's only Jason." Her wet eyes focused on the face. It was painted white, a great red gash for a mouth, and two black pits above. Below the face paint, he recognized the boy. It was Jason, one of Alex's friends. He swept a black cape, open and closed, pulling his head back to expose the long plastic fangs projecting out of the corners of his mouth. "I am here to welcome you to the party," he declared ridiculously. She was on edge and overreacted by hitting him as hard as she could across the shoulder with her bag. "Stupid fool," she snapped, unsympathetic to his humor. He grinned. "Touchy, touchy," he said less enthusiastically. "Still trying to give up smoking, are you?" he replied, now smirking, and obviously satisfied at her reaction to his prank. The boys walked off together in the direction of the music. They were laughing out loud, probably at her. Sarah dove her hand into her coat pocket, searching for a cigarette to cool her nerves, but found only the lighter as she remembered she was trying to give up. Instead, she looked back down the lane and was in half a mind to leave, but her shattered nerves wouldn't let her to go back down the dark path. Not now, not alone. She went forward, seeking the company of others, though with the costumes and dim light, it was hard to recognize anyone. Candles lit the hallway and the room that she sulkily followed them into, and they were on any surface that was flat, or even offered a niche where one could be jammed. To Sarah's mind, they were of every conceivable size and shape, and probably color, though that was hard to see in the flickering glow. Begrudgingly, she had to admit they worked well, and the mood was only partially disturbed on the wall to her left, where a trestle table had been placed. On it, between carved pumpkin heads, were laid out beside plates of food, empty glasses, part-full bottles of alcohol, and imitation spiders. Two real-looking cobwebs hung from the roof alongside a kerosene lamp. Sarah relaxed as she saw a girl she knew. Sandra was refilling her glass with punch, tightly wrapped in tattered toilet paper. The girl waved, and with some difficulty crossed the room toward her. "Good. You're here at last." The girl giggled tipsily, and before you say it, no more mummy and daddy jokes. Lubricated with a dash of alcohol, Sarah's reluctance to have a good time was washed away, and she began to enjoy herself. It was 11, almost to the stroke. In the brief silence after one song finished and the next began, that there was brilliant flash, lighting up the room as if it was the middle of a bright summer day. Almost simultaneously, an ear-shattering cracking noise reverberated through the house, before it turned into the rolling deep rumble of thunder. "That was close," said a voice from the crowd, breaking the hush that had fallen over the room. All Z part of Z Special Effects, Mind Poor Peasants, and Townsy Pepple, came the unmistakable voice over the beginnings of a new song. There were a few nervous giggles from some of the girls, but before anyone could say any more, a powerful gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing almost all the candles. There was a tapping sound outside as if a side drum was being slowly played. The tapping rapidly increased until the heavens opened, and torrential rain poured down. It seemed that almost instantly that the festive mood evaporated. Several couples threw coats over their heads and ran to their vehicles. "Where are you going?" said Alex, grabbing one boy. "We're all gonna get bogged in if this keeps up." He looked anxiously at the rain. It was getting heavier as they spoke. "It's just a shower," argued Alex. "It'll be over." "And what if it isn't?" said the girl with the boy. "It's a plowed field out there. We'll all be stuck here all night." "So," sneered Alex as they broke away from him and ran off down the steps. The room was rapidly emptying as others joined the exodus, trying to catch lifts while they could. He turned to face Steve and Sarah. "Not you two," he said almost angrily. "Sorry, Alex," Steve said. He glanced pointedly at Sarah. "That's great. That's really great. It's barely 10 past 11, and everybody's gone." "Terrific," he grumbled. "I went to all this." Their attention was drawn to a saturated young couple, rushing back up the step. "They've gone," said Barbara indignantly. "Everybody's left. We couldn't get a ride. It's raining a torrent. You can hardly see anything." They stood looking out into the darkness. Even the faint glow of the last car's taillights had vanished. There were just the 6 of them left. It took a while to shake off their somber mood. Nobody felt like eating or drinking. Even the loud music failed to get them dancing again. The party was over. Jason was the first to voice what they all felt. "This is no use. We might as well call it quits." Nobody was going to argue with him. All they could do now was wait for the rain to ease. But the rain didn't. In fact, it got worse. Through the gloom, Alex could see his van parked off to one side of the drive. Water was flooding up around the hubcap. He had parked on the grass to save carrying everything too far. He regretted that now, as it was almost certain the wheels had already sunk to the axles in the soft ground. Just as those who had left had feared, he turned to look back at the other 5. They were trapped, at least until the rain stopped. So, Barbara was shivering uncontrollably from her drenching. "If she doesn't get out of those wet clothes, she's going to catch pneumonia," said Jason. "I'll get a fire going," said Steve. He took an old chair by the back and kicked at it, breaking off a leg. Sarah was a little sad seeing the fire. It was clear that once its kindling had been beautiful pieces of furniture. Still, for all her reservations, it was an idea that was needed as the rain had cooled the night down. The timber they used was very dry, and it took only a short time before there was a decent fire blazing up the chimney. Too good a fire, as it soon became obvious that the meager supply in the room would not last long. Maybe there are some things in the other rooms, such as what Barbara. Alex's manner was unreasonably angry. I don't know, curtains, more furniture. What's here won't last long. Although it was a sensible idea, all thoughts of moving from the warm and comparatively friendly room
into the now dark and ominously quiet house was not well received.
Alex spoke for them all. We've got food, drink, and a warm fire. While it lasts, we stay here. His bravado of several days ago had gone. But the choice was not theirs to make, as shortly after Jason noticed that the room was filling with smoke. Soon, the air was becoming thick and uncomfortable to breathe. The chimney's blocked. Jason guessed, and as if to prove him right, acrid black smoke began billowing up past the mantelpiece to form a gradually thickening cloud at ceiling height. "We have to put it out," cried Barbara in alarm. "What with our hands?" Jason snapped back. Sarah held the material of her jacket to her face, hoping to ease the burning in her throat. The smoke hurt her eyes. She couldn't see. Somebody grabbed her roughly by the arm and pulled her through a door, slamming it behind them. They all stood outside in the hallway coughing. Here too, the candles had been blown out, and it was now so dark that the person next to them could be touched and heard, but not seen. "We need a light. One that won't blow out," said a complaining voice in the darkness. Sarah recognized it as Alex. When nobody replied, he spoke again, this time sarcastically. "I'll get the Carol lamp then, shall I?" Sarah could hear him as he felt his way back to the door and opened it. More smoke poured out, backlit in the hazy light like sunlight through a thick autumn fog. She could see his silhouette clutch his hand over his mouth and nose, and he raced half-blind into the dim pool of light. They heard him curse as he grasped at the glass, burning his fingers before finding its handle and racing back out of the room. Regrouping in the yellow glow, they felt utterly miserable. The thought of a long saturating walk seemed a tolerable discomfort to them now, and all of them gravitated to the outside door. Alex pulled on the smooth brass handle, but it refused to turn, and the door stayed shut. He pulled harder, but still it would not open. Steve stepped up muttering and pushed him aside. He grabbed the handle with both hands, twisted, and pulled.
"Shit," he snarled in surprise as he fell backwards, landing heavily, sprawled on the floor and still clutching the door handle.
Sarah quickly knelt by his side, but he dismissed her concern and got up. Though he was obviously hurt, he refused to admit it. "The timber must have swollen with the rain," muttered Alex, trying to cover his own apparent lack of strength in front of the girls. "There's another door at the back of the house. I saw it earlier this afternoon when we set up the sound." They made their way back along the hall, trying doors as they came to them. None would open. All had broken or non-existent handles, or because they too had expanded and were jammed tight. Minutes later, they found themselves back at the front door. "Try upstairs," suggested Sandra. "That's a stupid idea," said Jason. "No, it's not," she said irritably. "If we go upstairs, maybe we can get down at the other side of the house." "She may be right," agreed Alex reluctantly. "Unless somebody else has another great idea, but we'll have to be careful. It could be dangerous. I doubt anybody has been up those stairs in a long time." Sarah immediately remembered the shape at the window. If Alex had not been up the stairs, he could not have put whatever it had been there. A cold shudder ran down her spine. The others had already started climbing the decrepit wooden steps, staying close to the banister as if that would be any safer. The comforting glow from the lantern was moving away from her, and Sarah quickly caught up. Jason was at the top and trying doors. "There's one here that opens," he called back over his shoulder. Sarah couldn't see over or around the bodies in front of her, but it soon became clear that beyond this doorway was a narrow flight of stairs. Jason had begun to climb them. Past him, she could see that they would no doubt lead to an attic. She could bear it no longer. "We can't go that way," she said urgently. A couple of the others turned and looked at her. Don't you understand? It wants us to go this way. What are you talking about, Sarah? Jason looked back down at her curiously. We're trying to get out, and this is the only way we can go. Alex spoke. Of course, if you know a better way, then show us. He could not hide the irritation in his voice. I don't know a better way. But I know we are being taken further and further from getting out with every step we take. Sarah's genuine fear infected other girls, who began to back away from the door. Jason seemed aware that all three were on the edge of panic. All right, maybe she's got a point. We don't know where it goes. He blocked the way, waiting as the other boys backed down the narrow staircase.
We'll go back down and try the door again. This time we'll break it down if we have to. Does that make you happy?
His tone of voice could have been sympathetic, but also was more than a little condescending. His words soothed the girls, but before they could descend to the ground floor, there was a roar from the hall below as the side door burst outward in front of a wall of flames. Quickly, the wall of flames spread across the hall. Almost without hesitation, the fire surged up the first few steps, before slowing to devour one step at a time. In panic, they retreated back onto the upper floor and ran again to the doors, leading off with no greater success than before. We have to go up, said Alex. We'll be trapped, sobbed Barbara. We are already. There's no choice, and there may be a way out onto the roof, said Steve. No one argued. No one could. There were no other options. They had to move. Not only was the smoke thickening, flames were already consuming the lower half of the stair and banisters. In single file, they moved quickly through the small doorway and up the narrow staircase. Alex last of all, closing the door after him in the hope of delaying the rapidly approaching fire. Sarah was fifth in this line and could not see where they were going until she found herself emerging into the center of an empty room. The slope of the roof rose from the floor level, in front and behind them, to meet some 3 meters above their heads. The stairs had emerged directly below the ridge and were surrounded on 3 sides by ornate rails. Into the darkness. It looks wet and steep too. Sarah looked over his bent shoulder, down onto the driveway. She could shake the feeling that this had been the window she had looked up to. What are we going to do? She said. Barbara was crying. She was close to hysteria. And the boys just looked at each other. Suddenly, there was another voice. Not one of theirs, a high, squeaky voice. Come inside. Each of them looked at the other. I'm in no mood for ventriloquist jokes, said Alex, not knowing which of them he was accusing. Come?
Inside. This time, the voice had a direction.
It was not from any of the frightened group huddled around the stairwell. Instead, the voice came from the other side of one of the closed doors. Come. Through the door. Come in. It called again. The first faint plume of acrid black smoke was now rising up the stairwell. They had to do something, but what? Escape seemed to be slipping from their grasp. Time passes. Open the door, said Alex quickly, avoiding any of their faces. No, said Steve. The others looked from one to the other. None of them knew what to do. Alex stormed over to the door facing them. Don't, challenged Steve. The voice spoke again, slowly, calmly, comforting. It makes no matter what choice you make, but make one choice you must. Alex reached out a little more hesitantly for the doorknob. He looked back at the others as his fingers tightened around the handle. They could hear the crackle of flames getting closer. It seemed to come from right under their feet. No one spoke. He turned back to the door, but it was bombs, and turned the knob.